Hello everyone, and welcome to another Top 5 Records video. And welcome to the start of a new series of videos, in which you can also request videos. Because what am I going to do? This series is called Mono versus Stereo. And in this series I'm going to try to find out, should you go for the mono or for the stereo? Because I've had loads of situations in which I was in doubt. Is the mono the dedicated mix? Is the stereo the dedicated mix? Which version should I buy? And especially with these old albums, they can sometimes be very pricey and you just want to know what you're buying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare records. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to compare the most likely versions of albums with each other. I'm going to dive into that when I'm going to start with the first album, Please Please Me by the Beatles. But I'm going to do it with 3 chapters. First of all, what is the history of an album? So, is the stereo a dedicated mix? Is the mono a dedicated mix? Are 2 different mixes, but was the artist more involved with one or the other? Are there actually different takes in there? What do the artists think? So what is the story behind the mono or the stereo? Then the second chapter, I am going to compare the mixing itself. What are the mix differences? And in the third chapter, I'm going to try and find out what does this do with the texture of the sound. And finally, in every episode, I'm going to give you an advice, what I think you should buy. And sometimes that can be very difficult. For example, I'm going to start today with the Beatles Please Please Me. In the world of the Beatles, the stereo versus mono debate is on and on going. And it's also a very tough debate because the versions on Spotify, what's the sound quality? The versions of the, I believe, 2012 stereo box set, digital copies. They have to battle the 2014 beautiful analog mono pressing. So it's an ambiguous fight, and I'm going to try to give as much clearance for every Beatles album as possible. And I'm going to start with their first one. What I have here is a third UK mono copy of Please Please Me, which was pressed a month after the first pressing. It has the original stampers, so this is about as close I can get to an original mono sound as possible for me, because the first ones are in thousands and thousands of euros. I've compared this to the 2014 mono box, and I even prefer this one to the 2014 version. And I do not have a original or a stereo version from 1963. What I do have is a UK stereo from 1971 with the original stampers. Now, I'm quite a fan of these original Stamper 70s issues of the Beatles because they have a very clear sound on the vinyl. So I think this might make for a fair comparison. What I'm not doing, and I'm gonna add that in this chapter, is compare it to this one. Die Beatles Please Please Me und andere Knüller. This is the Herzu, which is in my opinion a sublime version in which they have it almost sounds as if there is no equalizer. There is, of course, a little bit of equalizing, but it is such a beautiful, clear sound. That would not be a good battle for the mono stereo thing. These 2 were mastered and mixed at the same time, and you get close to the source of what the initial ideas were. So I'm going to base it on this one. Now, first of all, the history of the Beatles Please Please Me with regard to mono versus stereo. There is a famous quote by George Harrison, I believe it was around the time when they were mixing the Beatles, with the question, when he heard for the first time a stereo, he said, but what do you do with all the sound in between? And that tells a lot about the background of these early Beatles records. Mostly they were not present during the stereo mixes. They were involved in the mono mixes. That doesn't mean necessarily that the stereo mix is bad, by the way, but the focus of the Beatles was on mono. Later on they would get involved, or there would be spent more time on the stereo, but in these days the stereo mixes were done quite easily after they've done a mono. Yet, you gotta take into account, if they've done the mono first, they have the experience of the mono with building up the stereo. So it's not as if they are just not knowing what they're doing. They actually know the takes, they know the material, so they don't have to start all over again, although they start all over again. It's for example, with this album, you notice that certain takes are different, so certain edits are different. For example, I have I have some notes on what the difference between takes are. You see here in I Saw Her Standing There, the stereo has a drop in volume. I believe at around verse 3. The mono doesn't have that. Misery, the mono intro is shorter, and the famous flaw of the difference between stereo and mono is that on the stereo version of Please Please Me, a different take was used in which you can hear John Lennon singing flat or making a mistake. So these differences are there. As a matter of fact, if you're a real big fan, getting both might be interesting because there are different takes around here. Now, that's the background. Chapter 2. Stereo versus mono. I was completely surprised with this stereo because this 1971 from the original UK Stampers has a very clear sound and it has a lot of detail. I love the clear sound. I have the idea that it might even be a little bit less compressed than the mono. Slightly less compressed. It's in a little bit of texture, and I'm not sure if this is a very good theory, but stereo in those days was much more thought about as something for audiophiles. General public listened to mono, and the monos had more compression, or they were mixing these albums with a lot of compression, because if a needle would pop out at a cheap record player, the record would get sent back. So they would not use the diversity or the high frequencies that a record who's played on a good system might be able to provide. So I'm wondering, is this stereo version slightly more detailed because it's less compressed and it took a different chance? I'm not sure. It's my guess. Yet, when you take a look at the stereo image, it doesn't really add up, because I made some notes about this. The bass and the drums, they are left. You have a guitar on the left and on the right. I believe it's George Harrison on the left and John Lennon on the right. All vocals are on the right, so the mixing is rather flawed. It's not. The idea behind it isn't that great, and it's very pen full left, pen right. Now, mono mixing is obviously on one speaker, full sound, coming straight at you, texture wise, and that's for me is the big difference. The stereo has a nice clear sound. This is also clear, but it also has a very deep texture. It is very direct, full sounding. It has a heavy, full sound. Drums really kick you, bass kicks you, voice kicks you. And when you listen to certain songs, I mean, when I put this on and you start with I Saw Her Standing There, the first thing I do is I start dancing. I just start dancing. Immediately after that, I put the stereo version on, and I notice that it's a very good stereo sound. I mean, it's not a bad LP. It's a good LP. A very clear sound, but I did not start dancing. And there are songs which I clearly prefer in mono. Baby It's You. The mono version has that beautiful punch that just adds up when you listen to John Lennon's vocals. You know, it has so much depth. It has so much power. So I'm gonna go towards the finale of this video with the question: what should you buy? Mono. Sorry, I'm taking a better seat. What should you buy? Should you buy the mono or should you buy the stereo? My advice is go mono on this one. Go mono. Full sounding. It has an interesting energy. It is awesome. Yet, I might add to that, the stereo, if you find a UK stereo with the original stampers and it's not pricey, do yourself a favor, buy it as well. There are some differences. It has a nice clear sound. It's not a bad pressing. The mixing is not brilliant. But, and I'm going to add to that again, if I should advise a certain pressing, If you come across this one, the Hertzu, this is an audiophile, clear presentation, the way you will never ever hear the Beatles again. I don't mind the bad panning at all on this one. I take it for granted because this sounds like such a beautiful uncompressed sound. Where the mono sounds like a beautiful full radio presentation, like you're traveling in time and you hear the Beatles for the first time on the radio and it kicks ass. This is as if you are in the studio with them all together. So mono or stereo, go mono. If you can find one of these, don't leave it lying around because you'll have a lot of fun. That is my advice, and I'm gonna continue with the mono versus stereo debate. Please leave your requests below. From which albums would you like to find out? Should I buy mono, stereo, and what's the story behind these albums? I'm very much looking forward to your replies, and I'd like to see you in my next video. Bye!